All right, what we're going to do today is we're going to play around with UI, and we're going to play around with not only just use UI and playing with user interfaces and getting a few scenes to be able to navigate between scenes, but we'll also play around with onboarding and also a few extra UI things such as the carousel, like adding a carousel to our application, and yeah. So let's get into it. Here's what the final product's going to look like. So I'll hit run. So you can see there's a little logging in message here that you're going to see. And after a while, this is going to go away. And the purpose behind this is we're going to set up the infrastructure for you to be able to add in user logging in. So like user login such as Firebase or GameSparks or PlayFab, be able to integrate user accounts into your game, but more importantly, be able to integrate user accounts in terms of anonymous users, because not all your users want to be able to register for your game. In fact, a lot of times your users may download the game and just want to start playing. They don't want to deal with entering their name, email, and all that sort of stuff. So the beauty of these three packages I just mentioned is that they allow for user anonymous login based on device ID. And so you don't have to worry about keeping track of user info. The downside is that what you're going to see is that the users, if they delete the game or they uninstall the game, they decide, okay, I want to install it later, then they'll lose all their settings, they'll lose all their progress, even their possibly in their in-app purchases. So you'd have to track in a way like how you can remember those things in case the user wants to come back. So that's additional functionality for another tutorial, another day. All right, so what we just saw while I was talking was that I had the word logging in, and eventually we came to the user stats. These are all just fictitious stats I made up, so I just hard-coded them. But what I'll do is I'll add in the area where I would tell you, incorporate your Firebase login code and retrieval of game data and so on. Actually, I'll start with settings page. So click on settings, see a little loading indicator that it just said loading 100% there before it just switched over. And the idea behind that was that sometimes, especially so this computer, it was quick enough to switch scenes, but maybe on the device, you may notice that you are clicking, but there's a delay in your click between going from your current scene to the next scene. So you need to have some sort of loading indicator, or a way to, maybe a tutorial message saying, hey, if you click this combination of buttons, you can do this move. So that's how, and you notice in other games that, you have this little message while you're loading that, hey, you can do this or that to solve this part of the game. So these little tutorial things are important. Now we just did a simple loading indicator from 0 to 100%. It went to 100% pretty quick in our case. And then it loaded the second scene. So the second scene, this is a carousel view, and carousel views are not added by default to Unity. They're not in the UI. You could purchase a carousel if you want, or you could create your own free one, which is what we're going to do right now. So as you can see, I'm using Gundam Seed as the theme for this game, and I've downloaded a bunch of images for different Gundams from Gundam Seed. So if I slide over, I can see that there's the different Gundams here. So there's the Justice Gundam, the Impulse Gundam, all right, the Destiny Gundam, and the Akatsuki Gundam. All right, so the different Gundams that you have available at your disposal. All right, and I just grabbed these images off of Google and just incorporated them into this little demo here. All right, we have a little back button here. All right, and also you see the name at the bottom. So as I swipe, the name changes, right? So hit back, and now we're back to the home page. Now, when I hit back, I should have had a loading indicator there too, but I didn't. Just for time's sake. Now, for you, once we do the loading message, you would translate that into doing that for your back buttons as well. It's important to do for the back button as well as the forward homepage buttons. All right, so we have here settings. That will do play, loading, and so we grabbed our conventional Unity chan. Now, what you're seeing here is that there's supposed to be a tutorial here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the game and restart it. So that, because what I did was I set it up so that the tutorial would only run the first time, and after that the tutorial would not run again. So you can see that because this is my second time running this, the tutorial is not here. So I'm going to hit stop. I'm taking advantage of player prefs, so I'm going to go to edit and clear all player prefs. right? And yes, I want to clear all my player prefs because I'm using player prefs to save whether or not the tutorial has been done, and just hit play. All right, so since I cleared player prefs, I'll just hit play and saying loading. Now you can see here's my little onboarding message. Just a very basic text box, but ideally when you're publishing a proper game to the app stores, you want to dress up with some nice images at least. But we're going to use text for this example, but you can apply this to images and so on. So it's saying here, welcome to Gundam Unity Chan. Click me to see more. If I click on that, the buttons above control my animation. So we're talking about these buttons here. Click again. The buttons on the left control my face. All right. And click again. After this tutorial, you will not see these messages again. Click again. Goodbye. Gone. So that's your little onboarding option. And of course, onboarding can go anywhere you want. And it's really custom. There's no like right and wrong way to do onboarding. You've probably seen onboarding in other games, how they do it. This is a sample of how you might want to do it, and just take advantage of player pref so that it doesn't come up again. Maybe add a button to relaunch the tutorial as you need to. That'd be a nice little thing for the user as well. And just approve, click on next and so on. So you can see that I wasn't lying about the different buttons. All right, you can see the mouth. If you look carefully, you see the mouth moving. Right. So yeah, and then you hit back. All right. And so that's what we're going to be working on today. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new project. What you're going to need for this project, as you can see, is we're going to need some graphics. And you may want to go down to Google and Google Images and start searching for something and downloading them. So we'll need a background image for our homepage. We'll need some images to serve as our buttons. All right. And we'll need also some images We'll need some images to serve as our carousel. So I used 5 images. So here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So you'll need like 6 images, landscape images in total if you're doing a landscape game. All right. So if you want to pause this video, go to Google, download images, 6 images and 2 button images, and come back and then continue on. All right. So in the meantime, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new project. So I got my Unity Hub open. I'm going to say new. I'm using 2019.4.9, even though 2020.1 is available. We'll just stick to that version since not everyone may have installed it yet, but you should be okay. All right, create a new project. I'm going to call this, I'm going to call it M3. Just hit back, M3, user interfaces. And give it a home. All right, so now what we want to do is let's bring Unity Chan into our game. So we'll go to our asset store, download it, and bring it in. There, so I just pulled out the window to make it easier to find. Here's not Unity Chan, here's Unity Chan. So click on it. There it is. Hit import because I already have it downloaded. If you don't have it downloaded, hit download, let it download. But I'm going to go straight to import. It's going to start bringing it in. Now you should see a window like this. Just hit import. Let it do its thing. All right, so now that Unity Chan is installed, we're going to come back to her in a little bit. Let's have a look at our scenes. And let's, first off, I want to rename sample scene to be something different. So I'm going to say rename. I'm going to call it home scene. All right, and sure, we'll let it reload. We haven't done anything yet, so that's fine. I want to add 2 more scenes and get them out of the way. So we're going to add a scene. Now I'll call it settings scene. And since we're at it, let's add 1 more and get it out of the way. Game scene. So now we have our scenes. We're going to work on them one at a time. But first, let's get our images in here. So by this point, I'm assuming you have already downloaded the images that you want to use in this game. So what we're going to do is create a folder. So highlight assets there and create a folder. I'm going to call it textures. All right. Now you're going to bring your images into the textures folder. Now you can do this through Windows Explorer, or you could add it here. It's up to you. So I'm going to pause and let you do that. So I'm using Windows Explorer and bringing them in this way. And now I've already copied and pasted them into the folder manually in Windows Explorer. Now, if I click back onto my Unity, it'll take a little bit of time. It's going to be importing. And you can see that that in a moment, textures are all there. Now, we're not done with textures because we just brought them in. We need to do one additional setting to all of these images so that they become usable in Unity here. So I'm actually going to click on all, do a Control A. And there you go. Change the texture type to Sprite, 2D, and UI. All right, that's the one we want. And then scroll down and hit Apply. And actually, since we're at it, let's actually drop the size down. 2040 might be a bit too large for this application, just to get it down to 1024. All right, so now we have all of our images. We set them to 1024. Everything's been applied. Let's go ahead and build our UI. So if I expand home scene here. All right, so when we expand the home scene, we see that we have our main camera and our directional light. Now, what I want to do is I want to add a UI component. Now, for UI, we need a canvas, right? Under game object, under UI, we would add a canvas, but we don't really have to add a canvas because whenever I add my first UI-based game object, canvas is already created. And so I'm going to jump right to image. I want to add an image and set up my background image. And see there, if I zoom out, there it is. Now I have an image, and if I hit game, so you can see where it is. It's like, I'm going to turn it around a bit, adjust my view. So you can see that white rectangular square is my UI. Now, it's in the bottom corner. I wanted to have it encompass the entire screen. First, let's choose the correct image, and then we'll stretch it out. So I'm gonna go to source image under the properties here, and it says none right now. And when I do that, this window pops up. I'm going to go with, it's called Gundam Seed Wallpaper, and hit OK. Now you can see it's occupying the bottom corner there. I want to stretch it to the entire size of the screen. So under Inspector here, if I hit this little box here, expand it, it gives me the anchor presets. I want to stretch it to the entire size of the screen, so I'm going to click on this one. This is going to stretch, but nothing's happened yet. I want it to stretch in both directions. I have to not only click on it, I have to also hold down the Alt key and click it a second time. And there, now it's encompassed the entire screen. So now I have my background image there. Now I'm going to add a few buttons. All right, so I'm going to again go back to game object and again to UI and choose a button. And there I threw a button right there. The button size is a bit, it's rectangular, but I want it to be more square. So I'm going to change the dimensions to be 50 by 50. All right. Now I don't want it up there. I want to have my three buttons in the bottom left corner. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit my anchor box again. And this time I'm going to choose this one right here. I'm going to anchor it to the bottom left. So I'm going to click on it first. Then I hold down my Alt key and then click on it a second time. And that puts it down there. And that's nice. But now what I want to do is I want to give it a little bit of an offset. So I'm going to take advantage of the arrows. Raise it up a little bit. That. Slide it over a little bit. There we go. And now let's change the source image. So I'm going to scroll down and source image. It's the base UI sprite. I'm going to hit the dot. And I'm going to choose my play image. All right. But you'll notice that the word button is still there. So we have to expand button and click on text and just clear out that text. All right. Now we're starting to add stuff here, but the stuff looks very generic. And so the names of the objects are very generic. We need to fix that up. So first off, since I have button highlighted, just gonna scroll to the top, change the word button to play button. All right. And since I'm doing that to play button, let's do the same to image. I'm gonna call it background image. All right. So now I have that. And so now I have those two named. Now I want to add two more buttons. One will be my settings button, one will be my about button, but I really don't want to drag a button again. So all I have to do if I want to bring in those two other buttons is to just duplicate them. So I have play button highlighted here. I'm going to do a Control D. There you go. I created play button 1. And let's just rename this to be settings button. All right. And I'll do a Control D again. This will be about button. We're not going to do anything with about button just yet, but we will focus on settings. But first, I need to, well, they're all one on top of the other, so I'm going to highlight settings button, and I'm going to drag the red arrow over a little bit more. So now we have two buttons. I'm going to highlight the about button and drag that one over a little bit more too. All right, so I have three buttons. Now let's just fix the images. So settings button should obviously have a different image. So I'll scroll down. There it is. Right now source image is play. Choose settings. There we go. Highlight the about button. Change source image to about. Now, I've been just clicking on different file names for my images. Of course, as you're building this thing, you've downloaded your own images. So you would just choose your own images instead of about and play and settings and so on. I'm assuming you've already done your images, you already got them, and they're ready to go. All right, one last thing we're going to add to this UI is a little loading text or logging in text. We'll put it right up here in the corner. So I'm going to add under UI, just a text. And of course there's Text Mesh Pro. I'm just going to stick to text for this one. Of course you can easily switch between Text Mesh Pro and text. I'm going to change the text from new text to be logging in. A few dots there. And the font color and location are not the greatest. So first off, we're okay with left justified. I'm going to stick to the conventional font here. I'm going to center in the side of the box, and color should be white, so I'm going to click on the color there, and I'm going to choose white. You can choose of course any color you want, just that white fits nicely on top of black, so that's why I'm choosing that. Now it's not good where it is, of course, so I want to anchor it, so I'm going to click on the anchor box, top left corner. So I click on the top left corner, hit Alt again, click on it again, and there we go. I'm going to give it a little bit of an offset just to give it some gap. There. Drop it a little bit, but I don't really have to. Actually, it's good enough. We'll leave it at that. And so now I have here a little logging in message that I'm going to use to display some dashboard stats. So in terms of designing your UI, you want to allow the user to jump into the game as quick as they can. So because that's especially when they're downloading it the first time, they just want to play, right? They don't want to be bogged down with a lot of preamble and whatnot or extra clicks. So there's a couple of approaches to doing it. One, you can just load the game right away, or you could have a little dashboard, and this menu here is meant to serve as a dashboard. So we're gonna hard code some player stats here to allow the player some relevant player stats to allow the player to know how they're doing in the game and so on. And then have the buttons to play or change their avatar in their settings or about for other settings as well. But that's the idea behind this. All right, so for now, we have here our home page. So let's just hit Control S to save what we have. So now we'll come back and we'll add more to the home page, but let's move on to the settings page. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna click on Project, go to Scenes, and double click on Settings Scene. And we have here, we're basically starting all over again, but what we're gonna do now is add that nice little carousel that I was talking about. Okay, so what I'm gonna do first is again, drop my background image in. So go to Game Object, UI, and Image. And I'm gonna take the same image I had before. All right, so what we're gonna do is choose under source image, Gundam Seed wallpaper. All right, and I'm gonna stretch it to the size of the screen. So click on my anchor, bottom right one there for stretch. Hold down the Alt key, stretch it again. Now, the thing about sub pages is that if like secondary pages, if you're going to reuse the image that you have here, it's best to fade it out a bit. All right, give it a bit of an alpha, so to reduce the dominance of it, because as you can see from this image, it can be very dominant. So anything you add on top of it will make your screen look very busy and very difficult to navigate. And you want your UI to be easy on the eyes. So I'm just gonna scroll down and click on color. When I click on color, we have the RGB. I'm not gonna touch any of those. It's A for alpha. I'm gonna reduce it. If I go like, let's say half, like 123, good enough. Just for this. And of course you can play around with it to your liking. All right. Click on game. So it's faded out a bit. All right. You might have a little bit of the background here, like a little bit of the game world behind it, which is okay. It just adds a little bit of an effect there in this case. I'm okay with it. And so on. All right. So we've got our background image here. Now we're going to add a carousel. Now the carousel is going to be on a panel. So I'm going to throw a panel here. So game object, UI, panel. Notice that canvas, and I should have mentioned it earlier, canvas has already been added. All right. And so interesting enough, the panel also fades out the background a bit more. So maybe we didn't need to fade out or alpha the background image, but hey, it's good to know anyway how it's done. So we got our panel here. First, I'm going to change the name. So I got here my image. I'm going to call it background image again. All right, and panel, I'm going to call it carousel panel. All right, so carousel panel. All right, now what I want to do is I want to add all the images that are going to represent each of the images in the carousel. I'm going to put them one on top of the other. So I'm going to add my images. So start with UI again, image, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to resize this. So first I'll choose the first image before I resize. All right, so my first one will be the Strike Freedom Gundam. All right, well, you see it there. It's not a good size. I'll just do a stretch in this case. You can of course resize it to your liking. Now I'm just gonna move it over. In fact, let's just use the anchors to center it. So I'm gonna hit center. It's already hit center, hit Alt again, just hit that. There we go, now it's nice and centered. Now I'm gonna raise it up just a slight bit because I'm gonna have some text at the bottom. There. All right, so I've got my first image. I'm gonna call it Strike Freedom IMG. All right, now instead of recreating this over and over again, let's use Control D to duplicate everything again. So I'm just gonna highlight Strike Freedom IMG, Control D to duplicate, and this will be Justice IMG. All right, and I'm gonna change the image from Strike Freedom to Justice. All right, still there. All right, now I'm gonna do a Control D again first on Justice IMG. And this one I'm gonna call Destiny IMG. And change its image to Destiny. All right, now Control D again. And I'm going to rename this to the Impulse IMG and choose the Impulse. Finally, one more. So Control D again. The nice thing about Control D is that it's duplicating everything, so I don't have to resize and move and adjust everything over. And you can see it can be quite a headache just trying to line things up, and it could look sloppy if you try to do it manually. This will be the Akatsuki. We'll choose its image to be the Akatsuki. All right, so I've got all 5 images there. Now, at the bottom, I want to have some text there to represent the text, the name of the image that's being displayed. So I'm going to add one more object here. So UI, and we'll choose text. And again, I'm going to put the text, well, I'll leave it as new text. It's good enough. And want to do a bottom center and hit Alt again. That throws it there. And what we want to do with the font is center the font, center justify. There we go. And maybe centered in the box. Change the color from gray to white again, or a color of your choosing. All right, so it's got the word new text there. All right, finally, let's throw a back button in the top corner. All right, oh, also let's name this text to be fighter text. All right, now let's add a back button. And I'm just going to reduce the width of this back button to, let's say, 50. Yeah, that's good. And let's call it back button. And anchor it to the top left corner. So hit that, top left, hit Alt, hold Alt, hit it again. There you go, top left corner. Maybe adjust it a bit. There, a little bit off the edge. And the text needs to be back. So we have to actually expand the back button, hit text, and change the word button to back. All right, let's do a Control S to save what we have. we don't lose it. Okay. Now we have all of our items in place for our carousel. What we need to do now is write code so we can swipe this carousel left and right. So let's add a script. So I'm going to go to project. And first off, I'm going to highlight assets there and add a new folder. All right, and this folder is going to be called scripts. And inside scripts, we'll add a new script. So we're going to add a new C# script. All right, call it Carousel View. And let's open this up in Visual Studio and start editing this script. All right, so now we have our carousel view. Now the following code we're going to write is originally by another author, and I will provide the link to that author. So I will cite that person in the video. So it's not my code. I'm just using it. All right, just for full transparency there. But it's a good novel approach. So I'll share the link to the person's website there. All right, so we're saying using Unity engine .ui. All right, now we're going to need some class variables. So let's define those first. First, I want to have a string, so public string fighter names. All right, and I'll need public rect transform images. So this will be our link to the 5 images we added to the screen. And also public rect transform view window. This will be our link to the panel we added onto the screen. So that's what these 2 variables are going to represent. All right, now let's define some internal variables to manage swiping and keeping track of the location of the window, so it looks like a smooth transition. First, we'll need a Boolean to check whether or not we can swipe. So we'll say private bool can swipe. Then we'll say private float image width, private float lerp timer. All right, so that it looks like it's a smooth transition. Private float lerp position. Private float mouse position start X. All right, so starting point of the mouse where we click. Private float mouse position end X. Private float drag amount. Private float, so to track how much has been dragged. Screen position. Now with respect to the screen, that's what this is. And finally, private float last screen position. Right? Oh, and a few more as well. So we're going to need, we want to add a little bit of a gap between images. So this is, you can play with this to see what works with you. We'll just say public float image gap. Set that equal to 30. So you can play with that to see how much gap you want between images. And this is also another tuning variable. You say public int swipe thrust hold and set that equal to 30. All right, so that it's sort of a tuning variable to see how much pressure you need to apply before you start dragging. All right, so you can play with that number, increase, decrease as you need to, but these two 30 numbers have worked well for me. All right, we'll need public int current index. So which image of the 5 images are we currently selecting right now, or visible? And finally, public text title. So the title text that I want to have right below each image. All right, so first off, inside start, what we're going to do is initialize everything. All right, so we're going to say image width is equal to view window dot rect dot width. So we're going to get the width there. And then for int I equals 1, I is less than images dot length, I plus plus. Autocomplete's not always your best friend. There. All right, we'll just say images of I dot anchored position is equal to new vector2 image width plus image gap times I, and then comma 0. That's our vector there. Just fix any errors. And just looking at my mistake here, it's actually first off times I and close that round bracket. So it's complaining because we're missing a bracket. There we go. Everything's all happy now. Now let's move on to update, and let's write in our code for update. So basically what we're doing is initializing there. Now in update, we're going to be constantly checking for swipes. All right. So under update, first let's get the current index. So int ind is equal to current index plus 1. Now let's set the text that's supposed to be displayed. So title.text is equal to fighter names of current index. All right. Now let's use our lerp timer there to time our smooth transition nicely. So lerp timer is equal to lerp timer plus time.delta time. All right. Now if the timer, so if lerp timer is less than 0.333 float, oops, that's it, so 0. So what we're doing here in the if statement is we're basically trying to have a smooth, gradual transition to the endpoint as the swipe is happening, as the swipe is approaching its endpoint. So as it's approaching its destination image, we want it to be smooth. So we're going to use lerp again. So we'll say screen position is equal to mathf dot lerp. All right, and we'll interpolate between last screen position, last position, sorry, lerp position times -1. And we'll gradually transition it by saying lerp timer times 3. All right. Now these numbers are tunable, but these numbers we're using -1 and times 3, these have all been tried and tested, and they give a good smooth transition, as well as the 0.333 there. So when you're in the last third of the screen, that's when you want to have a gradual transition. Now, we want to do is, I'm going to adjust this to have more visible. There we go. All right. Now, this is for during transition, this if statement. Now, what if we're about to start transiting? Okay. So we'll say if input dot get mouse button down. So we've clicked, right? So our left button there. If we do that, we're going to specify that can swipe is true. Okay, so we can write some functionality that will allow us to swipe, and we'll have our starting position for the swipe be mouse position start x equals input dot mouse position dot x. All right, so our starting position for the swipe will be based on where we clicked on the screen. All right. All right. Now we're also going to do an additional get mouse button. So if input dot get mouse button, which is a little bit awkward, but I'll explain why in a sec. All right. This is again to make it look smooth. All right. So what we're doing is at this point when the user has clicked on the button, right? But in particular, this is for when the user has dragged a little bit or to its end position, right? We're assuming that this will fire when the user has swiped and got to the end point of its swipe, right? Of his or her swipe. So we'll say if can swipe, right? We'll say mouse position end x is equal to input dot mouse position dot x. All right. Now we're going to figure out how much we dragged by, so we can use that in our calculations of how much to move the images over. So we'll say drag amount equals mouse position end x minus mouse position start x. So we got the difference there of how much was swiped. And our screen position will now be equal to last screen position plus drag amount. All right, so for these first two if blocks, we've determined the starting position, our first if block. We determined the end position of how far we swiped on the screen and how much has been swiped, what distance has been swiped by the person's finger or by the mouse arrow if we're using a desktop. So now what we need to do is calculate and adjust our images accordingly to be placed side by side so that we have like a row here, and we're going to be sliding everything across. All right, so all the images will be side by side sliding across. That's the way it's going to look. So we need to update everything. So we're going to say if mathf dot abs for absolute of drag amount is greater than swipe thrust hold, our little constant above that we define as a way for pressure, ended with can swipe, so making sure we can still swipe. All right, now at this point we're done swiping. The user, we've determined that the user is done, they've let go, and whatever we have, whatever distance, whatever x start and end position we have has been determined. So now we're going to say can swipe is false, so we're not in the swiping phase. All right, now what we're going to do is we're going to adjust all the images accordingly of the following lines of code. We'll say last screen position equals screen position, right, to save it. And we're going to say if current index is less than images dot length. All right, we're going to create a method that will that will complete all of our basically, I want to call it a completion handler. All right, but it's not a handler, it's just completion code to complete upon we finish swiping our items here. So I'm going to create a method eventually. We'll just call it onSwipeComplete. All right, we'll just let it be. It's going to give us an error. That's fine. We're going to create it in a moment. All right. Now, else if current index is equal to images.length and drag amount is less than 0. All right, so we're swiping in one direction, and we've hit the end point. All right, we've hit the end point. All right, so we can't. So we're at either the first or the last image. We'll just zero out the lerp timer, so that it won't try and drag even further. Right, to go off the screen basically. All right, so we'll say lerp timer equals 0. Right, that'll prevent it from swiping even further. Now, if it's the opposite, we'll say else if current index equals images.length ended with a drag amount greater than 0. All right, we'll do an onSwipeComplete as well. So let me summarize these ifs here. All right, so first off, the first and the last are basically when we're basically done swiping. All right, the middle is if we've hit an endpoint. All right, like it's either end. All right, and even if and actually the third one in particular, it's if the user is trying to push even beyond the bounds. So we're saying drag amount. There's still a this is greater than 0, meaning that the user is still trying to push even further. We want to stop the user at that point and prevent the user from actually pushing the images further off the screen and not be able to recover at that point. So we want to hit like a stop at that point. That's what the purpose of this third else if is. All right. So now we've got our dragging happening. It's done. It's either done or it's in position, depending on the if block that we're using here. What we want to do is now resettle all of the images into their proper positions. All right. So we're just going to do a quick if here, or sorry, quick for loop. All right, and say for int I equals 0. I is less than images.length. I++. All right, we'll just say images of I dot anchored position is equal to new vector2 screen position plus image width plus image gap times I comma 0. All right, so that'll just resettle everything into its proper position there. Okay, and we're done with the update method. All right, so the only thing left is to complete our onSwipeComplete method. All right, so just double checking, we have our closing curly there. There's our closing curly for the class. So this is the closing curly for update. Let's create our method onSwipeComplete. So we're going to say void onSwipeComplete. All right, should make it a private. All right, now let's save our screen position. So again, this method's all about completing our transaction here, basically on our swipe. So we'll say last screen position equals screen position. All right. Now, if the user is still trying to drag, so again, this goes back to the discussion I had a moment ago about we're trying to foolproof this script here. So we don't want the user to continue trying to push the image at the end to try and keep going and try and swipe the images way beyond off the screen. We don't want to lose the images there. So if drag amount is greater than 0, and the user will say if drag amount is greater than or equal to swipe thrust hold. All right. Now, we'll first check to see which index we're in. We'll say if current index equals 0, so if we're talking about the first image here now, then we'll just zero out everything and say, nope, you can't go any further. So we'll say lerp timer equals 0, lerp position equals 0. All right. We'll say else. So otherwise, okay, so if there's still, so if we're at the edge, fine, we'll zero things out. All right. Now, if there's still some possibility of drag, we can still continue on. We'll say else, we'll continue the dragging. All right. So otherwise, we'll say current index minus minus. All right. And we'll say lerp timer equals 0. Now you're probably wondering, well, what about, like, why are we decreasing it? Well, that's because this if block, when we're saying greater than, this if block drag greater than 0, this is for a positive, we're moving in a direction from bigger to smaller. All right, so a higher index in the array to the smaller index in the array. So basically, like, for example, the 5th image down to the 4th, down to the 3rd, down to the 2nd, down to the 1st. So we're going in a right to left direction. Yeah, right to left direction. All right. So that's what this if block here is all about that we're doing right now. All right. So there's still more inside this else. We're going to say if current index is less than 0, all right, then current index is 0. All right. So in case they try and force us off the screen, we're just going to save ourselves that way. And we'll say lerp position is equal to image width plus image gap times current index. All right. And so that'll be our else. Now, for this other if here, outside of this, we'll just do an else here as well. We'll just say else lerp timer 0, just to save ourselves again. All right. Now this block was all about going from right to left. All right. Now we want to do left to right. So what we're going to do is continue on with this if and say else if drag amount is less than 0. Now in this case, if its drag amount is less than 0, we are going from left to right. Now this block is going to be almost, well, it'll be basically the same as the block above, but just a few opposites in this case because we're dealing with the other end of the spectrum here. So we'll start off by saying if math.abs of drag amount is greater than or equal to swipe thrust hold. All right. Then we'll say if current index is equal to images dot length minus 1. All right. So we're at the end, right? The rightmost image. We'll say if the user is trying to drag beyond the 5th image in our example, we'll just set the lerp timer to 0 so they can't do that anymore. And we'll say lerp position is equal to image width plus image gap, all right, times current index. All right, so we're going to freeze it right there on that 5th image. All right, so they can't go any further. Otherwise, if there's still some space to go, like if there's still more images to process, so if we're going, like, say, from the 2nd to the 3rd or so on, we'll say else lerp timer is equal to 0, current index plus plus, and lerp position is equal to image width plus image gap times current index. And otherwise, we'll just set lerp timer to 0. Finally, let's zero out our drag amount so that we can put a stop to things. So drag amount equals 0. All right, and that's it for this. Now we can attach this script and see it in action. Now, before we do attach this script, I forgot to, there's a little error there. I just forgot a semicolon, looks like. So on swipe complete is missing its semicolon. Now we can go ahead and attach this script. So just Control S to save and attach the script. All right, so now it's time to add our script. And we're going to add it to our carousel panel. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to highlight carousel panel. All right, we're going to say add component. We're going to search for carousel view. All right, and there's fighter names and images. So we'll start with fighter names. I'm going to make it 5, and we'll just put the name. So Strike Freedom, and then Justice, and then Destiny, and then Impulse, and Akatsuki. All right, now for images, we'll hit 5 as well. We're just going to drag all 5 images into each index of this array. So there's Strike Freedom, just drag them into element 0. Justice, Destiny, Impulse, Akatsuki. Now view window is our panel itself. So carousel panel, we're just going to drag it inside of itself. All right. And title. So our fighter text. All right. Now let's give it a run. So save, Control S to save, give it a run. All right, and there you have it. So you have our home page, swipe it, there's Justice, there's Destiny, there's Impulse, there's Akatsuki. See, it didn't let me go any further, just sort of bounced back. All right, and if I go the other way, it does the bouncing action as well. Now, if you're having issues with this, that's okay. The link in the video will provide you a link to the actual code so you can have a look at the script itself, Carousel View, and see where you've gone wrong. So now what we want to do is we want to move into getting that back button up and running. So to do that, we're going to add another script. Let's go to my project tab. And I'm going to add a new script. And this will be called settings page script. And if it doesn't automatically pop up Visual Studio for you, you can always just double click on settings page script and get it to open. All we're going to do for settings page script is just add a small little event handler to navigate to the home page. So I'm just going to say public void go home. All right, and just say scene manager. Now, if I'm going to use scene manager, I have to bring in using Unity engine dot scene management. There. Now I can use scene manager. dot load scene, home scene. Now you might want to double check that scene name because you'll get an error, but I'll hit save for now. So home scene, just gonna click on Unity there. Just gonna, well, now I gotta let it load. And there, if I open up scenes, home scene, just one more quick look. Home scene. Okay, so we lined up the names correctly because it's important, otherwise this thing won't work. Okay, so now if I click on my back button, all right, first off, before I even click on the back button, we need to add another game object. All right, so I'm just going to click on settings scene there, game object, create empty. I'm going to call it settings page script, or just call it settings page. All right, add the component settings page script. There we go. So now for the back button, I can access this method through the settings page object. So I'm going to click on back button, go down to on click, hit the plus sign, and make sure you change runtime only to runtime and editor, or editor and runtime. Otherwise, this will not work in your editor right now. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to drag the settings page object into where it says none. Under function, settings page script, there's go home. Now, hit save, give it a run, test that back button. All right, now we're going to run into an issue here. If you run it, you hit back, there's a little error. Home scene cannot be loaded because it's not been added to the build settings on our asset bundle. What this means is every time you add a scene, you have to add it to the build settings. All right, so if I go to File, Build Settings. All right, so when this window pops up, I'm having a little bit of trouble here getting it to display, but you can see the button Add Open Scenes. This is the button you gotta click. So you gotta click it every time for every scene. So you have to open up all the scenes now. We hit Add Open Scenes and just wait for it to add it. I should mention that when you hit Add Open Scenes, just hit the X to close the window and then move on to the other scenes. All right, so let's switch over to home scene, get that one open. Again, do the whole build settings. All right, so we'll just hit add open scene. All right, so we'll X this out. All right, so let's hit run. All right, so now we have our settings page finally. Hit back, and there's our home page. So now let's actually get the page navigation working for the home page as well. So we're going to add a new script. So go to scripts, C# script. So new C# script. I'm going to call it main page script. Put it in the wrong place. I apologize. I wanted that in scripts. I don't know how it bumped back, but we'll move it afterwards. I'm assuming you create in scripts. It's there somewhere. All right, now for now, let's now it should have popped up your Visual Studio. Mine is under scenes, so open scenes. There's main page script. So I'm just gonna add my my event handler. Actually, what I need to do though is bring in, so using scene manager. So Unity engine.scene management. That's what I need. All right, so we got that. Now I can add in, I'm gonna add in both the ones I wanna work with today. So we'll start with go to settings. So we'll say public void go to settings. And we'll just say scene manager dot load scene settings scene. And since we're at it, let's get the game page scene as well. So we're going to say public void go to game. And we'll just say scene manager dot load scene game scene. All right, just hit save. Double check the spelling and the names of your files there. So, all right, so switch back, open up home scene. We're gonna add a game object here. Let me just adjust the screen again. All right, so game object, create empty. It's gonna be called main menu script. We'll add our main menu page or main page script. So we call, sorry for the inconsistency. Actually, let's make it consistent. So main page script. All right, so there's consistency there. All right, so we have our game object here. Now let's go to our canvas and we'll start with the play button. Under click, same as before for the back button, make sure you choose editor and runtime and drag your main page script there and choose main page script, go to game, and then for settings, editor and runtime, drag main page script there, and choose go to settings. All right, do a Control S to save, hit run. All right, so let's start by hitting the settings page. Hit settings. All right, hit back. We have navigation there. If I hit play, it's going to cause an issue right now because I didn't add my game. See, it's giving me an error because I didn't add my game page yet to the build settings. I need to do that still. But suffice to say, we have our page navigation up and running for the settings page. Now the next step is actually to jump into the play button, play game, and let's the game page, and let's actually get our onboarding up and running now. So we're going to do some onboarding here. So I'm going to open up game scene. All right, so there's game scene. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to throw a plane on the floor and bring in Unity Chan. All right, so we're going to bring in under 3D object a plane. Just make it 1000 by 1000 in scale. All right, it's good enough. If I look at the camera, all right. Okay. If you want, you can change the color or give it some texture, but I think we should be okay. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring Unity Chan in. So now, if I go to Unity Chan model, under prefabs, I want Unity Chan, well, just Unity Chan. So I made it sound like I wanted something particular, but we'll just drag Unity Chan onto the scene. All right. Now I want to put the position for Unity Chan at 0, 0, 0. So 0, 0, 0. Let's make the scale of Unity Chan 5, 5, 5. All right, let's have a look in our camera to see if camera can see Unity Chan at all. Yep, there we go. We just have to rotate Unity Chan by 180. All right, so now Unity Chan should be Oh, actually I made the camera rotate. Control Z to undo that. Sorry about that. You got to highlight Unity Chan, make Unity Chan 180. There we go. Now highlight the camera and we can see Unity Chan there. I just want to make some adjustments to the camera. So since we got the camera view up, let's just, oops, too far. Let's play with the field of view and just get this thing proper. In fact, it's jumping on me too easily, so I'm just gonna actually change the numbers. So it'll be position will be 0 and then 7.06 and then negative 9.53. All right, and I want to rotate it down, so we can use the rotation, but I'm just gonna enter the X rotation just to save time at 16.66. Now of course play with these numbers, see if you can get a rotation that you like. And so yeah, rotate at 16.66. And scale is fine. Field of view, let's make it 48, just zoom in a bit. All right, so there's a more deeper view of Unity Chan. All right, so there's Unity Chan right there. I'm just gonna hit Control S to save my scene. Okay. All right, so now let's add our onboarding here. Now, if I run Unity Chan on its own, you will see basically what you see in the game, but you're going to see a couple of extra menus, a couple of extra panels come up. We just want to demo that quickly. Right, and so you can see you got like you have the little actions here. These are all facial features for Unity Chan, these buttons. And this is for next pose, right? So this space is open here. Let's put a little panel here to illustrate onboarding, like telling the user basically, you know, that's the panel above is for moves, the panel on the left is for facial expressions, just something very basic, very simple in terms of onboarding. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna add a panel to the game view, and that'll automatically generate our canvas. So I'm going to game object, go to UI, and add a panel. Now you can see it auto-generated the panel, all right, and auto-generated the canvas inside and place the panel inside of it. Now it's covering the entire screen. I don't want it to cover the entire screen. I want it to cover like the bottom quadrant, right? I'm thinking probably about there. Let's make it push off from, let's give a little bit of a edge, just so it's not like right against. Right, there's our panel. All right, now what you would do is you would typically add a background image, right? To have some nice little texture, right? And we could, all right, inside of it. So if you really want to have like a nice little background image, you can do that by going to, game object, UI, image, right? It's inside of canvas. What we want to do is place it inside of the panel. Now it's going to place it there. So actually it needs to be a sub-object of the panel before it can actually do that. So let's actually drag it inside the panel. There we go. Now let's try that anchoring again. So I want it centered. There we go. Just got to resize it to fit nicely. Might take a little bit of massaging there. Good enough. A little background there. Now, we want to have is maybe a text box. So ideally, you want to use images, nice graphics for your onboarding. I'm going to use raw, simple text for this exercise, but of course, you can take it a step further and get some Photoshop, get a nice artist, and just create some nice text, or just create some nice onboarding graphics. So I use text, make text a part of there. I'm actually gonna give some names. So this should be for image, we should call it tutorial, image BG for background. All right, and this text will be tutorial text. We want tutorial text to reside within the bounds of that panel. We've already made it a sub-object of the panel, so we're going to click to center it, hit Alt, center it again. There we go. It's like nice and centered now. The dimensions, let's double check the dimensions. We have a lot of space there where we actually make it bigger, but I'm not going to stretch it. That will just look terrible. Instead, let's make the dimensions, let's start with like 200 by 70 to see if that will work. All right, kind of sticking out a bit. All right, so let's make it 180. A little bit out. 160. Better. All right, 160 by 70 is the dimensions we're going to use here. Okay, I'll leave it as new text. It's good enough. And in terms of any other settings, I think we're okay. The last thing I want to do is I want to put a button on top of this. All right, so I'm going to add a button so that we click on the button and it'll advance to the next tutorial text. So throw a button, and again, I'm going to make this button a sub-object of the panel. All right, we'll call it next tutorial button. All right, and we want it to center. We want it to center on the panel, right? So again, anchoring center, hit Alt. Now it's dead center, but I don't want all of that stuff all around it, and I also want it to be the size. So we'll match the dimensions up. This will be, let's double check our dimensions. Tutorial text was 160 by 70, so this button should be 160 by 70. All right, so now it covers it, but I don't want it to cover my text. All right, I want it to be an invisible button. Let's get rid of the word button first of all. So I'm going to switch over to text. All right, get rid of button, hit enter. Now there's no text there. All right, go back to my button, highlight that. And in terms of color, I want to make this invisible. So I'm going to go to the alpha, make the alpha 0. Okay. Now, there's a couple other things we need to play with here. All right. Actually, one other thing. Okay. Actually, a few. Okay, so we have here normal color, highlighted color, and so on. What we want to do is we want to make everything, well, not everything, 0. We're gonna make it invisible because it's gonna be cumbersome when you mouse over it or you press down on it. Right? Let's make normal color 0. All right. Let's make highlighted color 0 because it's gonna cover up our text. And selected color should also be 0. I think that's good enough. All right. And so that's our button. So it's basically an invisible button. All right. Pressed color, I'm actually leaving that on purpose just to indicate a press. So like just some feedback for us. Okay. So now let's actually, now we have all of our stuff in play. The trick now is to actually create some script to actually manage this. All right. Actually, since we're adding stuff to the screen, let's add our back button. Get it out of the way. We're going to need it eventually. So go to game object, UI, button. This will be just a simple width will be, let's say 50 again, just like the other scene, and anchor it to the top corner. All right, and give it a bit of an edge. Make the text say back. All right, and that's it. Now let's save our scene. Now let's create a script to manage all of this stuff. So go to project, make sure I click on scripts this time, and then hit plus C# script. Call it a game page script. And let's open it up in Visual Studio. All right, so now that we have this open, let's start by defining, well, first let's start importing the stuff that we're gonna need. All right, we're gonna need, so using Unity Engine dot scene management and using Unity Engine dot UI. All right, we'll need those two things. And we'll define our class variables, get them out of the way. All right, so we're going to need a class variable for our tutorial text, which we're going to enter in the Unity editor window. So say public string as an array, tutorial text. We could hard code it directly into the code here, but we can also do it inside the editor. So we'll do it inside the editor. And also public int tutorial num equals 0. This will be our counter for which index in the array we are dealing with. Now for the UI object, so say public text tutorial label. And finally public game object tutorial window. All right, this will be our link into the panel. All right, so we can hide the panel and hide the panel as we need to. All right, so the text will be for the text and the window will be for, the tutorial window will be for the panel. All right, so what I want to do is I want to start off with the method that we're going to be using. We're already at index 0. So in terms of start, we'll get it to display the correct index in the array to start off with. We'll also create a method that for that button, so it clicks on to the next one. All right. So first off, actually, we'll get it out of the way. We'll hit start, and we'll say tutorial label dot text is equal to tutorial text of tutorial num. We're going to modify start. We're going to expand upon it in a moment, but let's just create the event handler that we need. And actually, since we're at it, let's get that go home method out of the way too. So we'll say public void go home, our back button, get that out of the way. And just say scene manager dot load scene for home page. Double check. Do we call it home page or home scene? Home scene. So I'll make sure that it's home scene. This should be home scene. Right. So that button that we created in our tutorial window there, we're going to use that to advance our tutorial to the next one. So we're going to say public void next tutorial message. All right. Now we'll say tutorial num plus plus And we'll see that if we have gone to the end of the length of the array, we're done displaying our messages. So we'll check for that first. We'll say if tutorial num is greater than or equal to tutorial text dot length, then we're done. What we want to do here is we want to hide this window. So we're going to say tutorial window dot game object dot set active to false. All right, that'll hide the entire tutorial window. But let's take it a step further. Now, tutorials are great the first time, but really does the user need to see the tutorial the second time, the third time they're playing the game? We should set it up so that it never displays again. And even beyond the scope of this example today, you could maybe add a button to re-enable it in case somebody wants to see the tutorial over again. It's nice to have. But what we'll do is we'll take advantage of player prefs and hide it. So we'll say player prefs dot set int. We'll call it tutorial done. And we'll set it to 1. All right. Now else, all right, we'll say tutorial text. Sorry, tutorial label dot text is equal to tutorial text of tutorial num. All right. So now this is our method for advancing to the next tutorial. All right. So we're going to keep hitting the button and we'll keep running this method until we hit the end, and then it'll hide it. Now, what we want to do is we want to ensure that this only appears the first time and not after. So what we need to do is back to start. Is say if player prefs dot has key for tutorial done, and inside of it, if player prefs, not exactly necessary, but just for completeness, get int for tutorial done. Make sure check see if it's 1. Then we'll hide the window. We'll say tutorial window dot game object dot set active to false. Else, so this is the big else. Go ahead and display that first line of text. And that's it for this script. Okay, let's save it. Now let's integrate this script into our scene and connect things up. So we'll save it. So let's create a game object, an empty one, and we'll call it game page script. Let's add our new script here, game page script. Now let's configure it. So let's say the tutorial text is 5. And let's enter stuff in. So let's say for the first one, welcome to Gundam Unity Chan. Click to see the next message. All right. Now for element 1, let's talk about the elements, the buttons above it. So the buttons above control my animations. Element 2, the buttons on the left control my face. Now element 3 will say after this tutorial you will not see this message again. And finally, goodbye. All right. So we've got our tutorial outlined here, the 5 messages we're going to see in our tutorial, in our onboarding. Now we just need to link up the last 2 items, tutorial label and tutorial window. So tutorial text goes tutorial label, and tutorial window is our panel. Making sure next tutorial button is highlighted, where we see on click, hit the plus. Make sure this is editor and runtime. Drag our game page script into this. And under no function, open up game page script. Look for next tutorial message. Now it'll work. Also our button, our back button, which I didn't really label as back. I should have, but let's do it. So button there, that's our back button. Hit a plus sign for that. Editor and runtime. Drag our game page script into it. And under game page script, go home. Go home, go home, go home. Hit Control S to save. Let's give this a run. And double check our button presses. All right, so there we see, welcome to Gundam Unity Chan. Click to see next message. There are buttons above control my animations. The buttons on the left control my face. After the tutorial, you will not see this message again. Goodbye. Gone. All right. If I hit back, just to test the back button, we're at our home page, but we didn't configure, or did we? Let's actually check. Hit play. And we did. So our play button's back. We notice that there's no tutorial window here because we've already seen the tutorial. All right. So now we've completed onboarding, and you can take this a lot further. We're just doing very basic text onboarding. Of course, you'd want to dress it up with some beautiful graphics and proper language and whatnot. But that was just to get you understanding of onboarding here. Now, the next step and the final step in this tutorial video is about logging in. So we're going to switch over to our home page. All right, and home stretch here. We're almost there. So now let's focus on our home page here. That little logging in text. We're going to take advantage of that and make this into our little dashboard. Now, of course, you would dress this up 1,000 times better in a proper implementation, but just to show you and get your feet wet with what you want to do and how you want to set up your home page, or really your dashboard, to be able to display the proper information to your user. This home pages are kind of obsolete. Like just think of a conventional home page, just saying like play or whatever. Like just having a home page that says play and then going to the game is really useless, right? Users, when they click your game icon on their phone to launch their game, they want to go straight into the game, right? Unless there's something they need to do, like choose something, all right? So that's the idea here. All right, so what we're going to do is jump to our script, our main menu page script, our main page script, that is, and we're going to add more to it. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is going to add, we're going to say using Unity Engine .ui. All right, then we're going to define a couple of variables. So we're going to add our class variables. First one is for our loading text. We're going to say public text and public text, call it load text, and we'll say private int call it load progress. Set it equal to 5. All right. Now, what we're going to do, first of all, is we're going to start by creating some sort of fake login. All right. The idea is that if you have a game, a proper game, and you want to have a user account, you would set up an account with Firebase or GameSparks or PlayFab and take advantage of their software as a service, or create your own custom server. But the idea is that in your main menu, you want to be logging in behind the scenes to that server and downloading game details for that particular user, their stats, their status, any in-app purchases, whatever. You want that happening in the background. We're going to create a fake login. You know, we're not going to do anything. We don't have time to create a database and download stuff or even get Firebase implemented in this case. So what we're going to do is just pretend we're going to delay for 5 seconds and then log in. And we're going to use something called a coroutine. Coroutines are special methods that are run on the side, like mini threads in a way. And we're going to use this keyword IEnumerator. All right, call it fake login. All right, and inside this fake login, we're going to say while true. Inside a coroutine, there's a keyword called yield. And yield is used for basically saying, okay, we've run this little method. We can pause now or go back to control from another method and then come back later. That's basically what it means. There's different ways to yield, but what we're going to do is we're going to just basically wait for 1 second. We're going to say pause execution of this method for 1 second. That's what we're going to say with the following line of code. We're going to say yield return new method's called wait for seconds. Pass in 1 second. All right. You're telling the code to wait for 1 second. Then you're going to decrease our counter, load progress minus minus. All right. Now, if load progress is less than or equal to 0, then break out of this infinite loop. That's it. Now, at the end of the while loop, outside of the while loop, you're going to say load text dot text is equal to. Now let's so right now by default the text says loading. All right, when you load the game it says loading. Let's change it to like welcome. Your stats are, and then let's do a /n for a new line. We'll say record. Well, would like to continue there. /n will say record. Let's say, I don't know, 34 and 6. And say XP is, let's say 567, 897. Maybe put this on a new line and say coins 432. And this is all stuff we would have downloaded from the actual server and displayed it accordingly. So the idea behind it would be like a dashboard. You'd have the status of your player and display that. That'll be the most compelling reason to have a homepage in the first place, so the user can see the most immediate information. All right, think about a bank app. When you log into your banking app, what's the first thing you see? Your bank balance, right? So the most important things for a user that uses a banking app are prevalent here too. All right, so the most important stats: how am I doing? How many coins do I have? How many points do I have? Right? I should, if I'm going to have a homepage, if I'm going to be seeing a homepage first, I should be seeing that. I should be seeing most important information. All right. So that's our load text. Now, how do we call a coroutine or this method fake login? Well, let's go to our start and call it there. The way you call a coroutine is to call a method called start coroutine. Inside of it, there's a few different ways. There's a few overloads for this. But simplest way here is to say fake login with round brackets. Like you're calling a method inside a method. All right, and that's it. Let's hit save. And let's try this out. All right, before we run this thing, let's go to our main page script. All right, we have their load text in our canvas. Let's find our text and just highlight that to make sure we got the right one. We just called it text. We should have probably given it a name. Keep it as text now at this point. And oops, got to hit main page script, drag text to load text, Control S to save. Let's give it a run. All right, there you go. It's kind of cut off my stats. We could resize it. In fact, we'll resize it and we'll run in a moment, but let's actually make the height, let's say 150. All right. And you notice that the box is kind of over and about there. So we're gonna have to realign it to the top corner. There we go. And let's actually make it top justified. And I know that I don't have exactly the best graphic for this. So you're gonna see you might see some of the text cut off and stuff, but at least for now, this is fine. All right, final topic for this video is, well, when we hit play to go to the next page, we should have some sort of loading indicator to say loading, right? Because on this computer, it loaded pretty quick. You saw that earlier, but what we really want to see is some indication to the user to say, hey, we're loading. We're gonna use, again, simple text for this. We'll just say and we'll store like a percentage indicator. So we're gonna add another method to our implementation here. All right. And we're also gonna use a coroutine again as well to do this. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna create another coroutine. So this is our fake login coroutine. Now, just to talk a bit about this, you would actually replace this block here with your login to Firebase or your login to GameSparks and your login to PlayFab, whichever or whatever database service you want to use to download data. All right, you do it inside this while loop, and then you'd break out of the while loop once you're done and display your stats accordingly. So that's why this block of code is important that way. Now, getting back to what I was trying to say, we're going to create another coroutine. So we're going to say IEnumerator. All right, and we'll call it scene asynchronous load. All right. String scene. So the argument we're going to pass in is the name of the scene we want to navigate to. All right. Now we're going to use something called an async operation. It allows us to load the scene asynchronously. So Scene Manager has capabilities. We're going to say async operation, call it AO, equals Scene Manager dot load scene. So we used load scene already. All right, above. Actually, you can see right here, Scene Manager load scene game scene. We're going to replace that line of code in a moment, but we're going to use load scene async. All right, and pass in scene. All right. Now we're going to say AO.allow scene activation equals false. We're going to say, okay, we want you to load the scene, but not just yet. So we're setting this to false. We want to load first. All right, and while it's loading, we want to track the progress of the actual load. So we're going to use a while loop and say while not AO.isDone. All right, so behind the scenes, this new scene is loading behind the scenes. And this isDone variable will turn to true when we're done loading here. So in the meantime, we want to update our progress. We're going to say float progress equals mathf dot clamp 01. And we'll say AO.progress divided by 0.9f. All right, just give us up to 90%. All right, now let's update our load text and say load text dot text equals loading space and then plus, and we're going to say progress times 100. Add in a percent in quotes, but we're gonna have to cast our calculation to be an int because it's a float. So we're gonna say int. We don't want the decimal spaces, so we're gonna chop off the decimal spaces and just give us the actual number as an int. All right, so that's gonna update the text. Now we're gonna, when we hit about 90% in progress, then we'll allow the scene to activate and to start loading or switching. All right, so we'll say if AO.progress equals 0.9f. All right, we're at 90% load of the scene. Then we'll say AO.allow scene activation equals true. All right, so now we're going to say, okay, go ahead and load. All right. Now you're seeing that there's an error underneath the name of my method here. Okay. And that's because we haven't given it a yield. This keyword yield is missing. So like I said before, this word yield means, okay, pause this method for a moment and go do something else and come back when I'm ready. Now in our last example, we said yield and then wait for seconds and said 1 second. So we said yield for 1 second. All right. Here we're just going to say like 1 tick. All right. So we're going to say yield return null. Basically, next CPU cycle, come back and check in on me. That's what that means. All right. And that's it for our asynchronous load method. All right. Now all that's left to do is incorporate it into our two go-to methods. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to comment out each of these lines of code. So I'll start with this. I'm going to replace it with start coroutine. And the method we're going to call is scene asynchronous load. And the argument passed in will be settings scene. All right. Now let's do the same thing for game. All right. Start coroutine scene asynchronous load, and this time for game scene. All right, that's it. We're done. Let's hit save and let's run this thing. Well, let's hit run. So, loading. All right. So here's our home page with our stats. We fixed that window, so it's a lot better now. Not perfect, but hey, good enough. Let's hit play. There's loading, 0. It went so fast, it went to 100%. But you saw in the original demo, it actually was at 100%. You would want to try this on maybe an older tablet or even just a phone or a tablet, and you'd see how a weaker processor like that would show you, the loading progress. Now you're seeing that our tutorial is no longer here because our player prefs indicated so. We saved in player prefs. Now if I hit back, now if you wanted to test that out, all right, if you want to test that out, so we're re-logging in now. You want to add some more functionality here to prevent re-logging in over and over again because that's multiple hits to the server, but I'll leave that for you guys to figure out. Going back to my player prefs discussion, you go to edit and you go clear all player prefs. That'll clear that player pref setting for you so you can revisit the whole tutorial thing and double check and maybe enhance it and so on. All right, last thing to do is to test our settings page. There it is. You saw it goes from 0 to 100, so it went there pretty quick. There's our settings page with our carousel. And you'd want to have a loading indicator for the back button too. All right, so that summarizes advanced UI techniques here. So we weren't just focused on the conventional UI stuff, which we did. We did buttons and panels and images and so on, but really we got into more advanced stuff like making a carousel, all right, making a loading indicator, all right, tutorial, so onboarding, so advanced techniques here that you want to take the basics and advance into. All right, so that's it for today. It was a pretty long tutorial, but next video, we're going to look at animation. So we're going to actually continue on with this and animate some of these images or some of these buttons and so on, and also talk about mechanism.